President Lee Jae Myung is currently on a state visit in the United Arab Emirates, where he's promoting productive partnership in trade, advanced technology and defense. We have more in Press Perspective today. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, November 18th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today, we touch upon President Lee Jae Myung's diplomatic agenda in the United Arab Emirates, the first leg of his four-nation 10-day tour of the Middle East and Africa. For more on this, I have freelance reporter David Lee here in the studio. David, welcome back.
Good to see you, Sunny.
I also have Shreyas Reddy with NK News live on the line. Shreyas, it's good to have you on.
Good to see you.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. David, let's begin with details of the President's agenda in the UAE. I believe he spoke to a local daily as well.
Yes, he did. Just to give a short brief of his trip to the UAE. This is the President's first trip to the Middle East and the African region as President of South Korea. And he's carrying the goal of expanding outreach to these regions. And the UAE, it's his first leg of the trip, of the 10-day trip to this region. He will spend 3 days, and he departed on Monday. And just a quick background, the UAE is the only Middle Eastern country that South Korea has a special strategic partnership, which was established in 2018. And the two countries have quite a history of having a close, relationship. They have 45 years of diplomatic ties. And according to the presidential office, the meeting happened as President Lee met with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Gyeongju. And apparently he was invited at that time. And that's why he departed on Monday for the UAE. Where he visited the National War Memorial and also the Grand Mosque, which is a tomb site of UAE's first president. First Lady Kim Hae-kyung was seen wearing a hijab. And today, like you said, he had an interview with the local paper in the UAE, where which happened before his summit with the UAE president. And actually, I saw a video before coming to the studio. The two heads of states were actually in a meeting, and they're set to sign a memorandum of understanding that discusses strengthening cooperation in the defense industry, AI, and other strategic sectors. So they might have just signed it while we're talking, because the meeting is happening in real time. In the interview with the local paper, he highlighted how he wanted this relationship with between South Korea and the UAE to be a sort of a new centennial phase of relationships that goes beyond these traditional cooperation in sectors like defense and AI, and even overreaching to sectors like space exploration, renewable energy. And he promised a role in developing UAE's AI semiconductor ecosystem. As we all know, South Korea has a strong foot in that sector. So, the UAE can also rely on South Korea for these matters. And I think there's a really kind of increasing bridge with the cultural sectors. The UAE is as the president says, is the most important travel destination for South Koreans in the Middle East. And President Lee put out a roadmap to establish a Korean cultural center in the country by 2030. And the UAE is known to be a very big fan of K-pop and K-drama. One of the biggest in the Middle East, according to some reports. Lastly, I want to mention that the president also plans to ease entry for UAE citizens coming to South Korea, which is also caused by the tremendous popularity of K-culture in the Middle East.
Right, indeed. Now, Shreyas, as David said, this is the president's first visit to the Middle East as the head of this country. What has been the response within the media with regard to the implications of this trip to the region?
Well, I think at this point, in some ways, we're still waiting to see what comes out of it. As David mentioned, there's certainly some deals, some areas of priority, but I think there's certainly a lot of anticipation about what will come next. And a big part of it is just the fact that, as you mentioned, it is his first visit to the Middle East. But I think in some ways, the Middle East has not always been the biggest priority for South Korea. Yes, it's been an important region worldwide. And so South Korea does have relations with many of the countries there. But in some ways, a lot of this reflects President Lee's focus since he took charge on trying to strengthen South Korea's relations with countries beyond just a select few that have largely dominated its interests over the years. At the start, we saw President Lee sent special envoys to various countries and regions. At the time, the Middle East was not part of that focus, but certainly ahead of this visit, Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Hun-sik visited Saudi Arabia, visited the UAE, and a big part of it was about promoting the South Korea's interests, particularly in defense industry, sales, diplomacy. So that is something that is critical to Lee Jae Myung's interests, and we're seeing a lot of focus on collaboration in artificial intelligence, defense capabilities, and cultural exchanges. As David mentioned, there's already a big market for some of those things in the Middle East, and Lee Jae Myung has said he essentially sees UAE and perhaps the region as a base camp for South Korea to forge and strengthen its economic foothold in the region. And so what we're going to see perhaps is a lot more interest in what comes next beyond the UAE, which is already a strong base for South Korea, as it seeks to make economic inroads in the region and build up a lot more focus, a lot more cooperation in defense and key industries like AI.
Right then, David, as Shreyas has highlighted, defense cooperation is indeed on the president's diplomatic agenda, as the world witnessed a tangible surge in defense spending last year, I believe. In fact, David, could you walk us through this jump in spending with regard to defense on the global front?
Yes, so according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the global military spending reached 2.7 trillion in 2024, and this is a 9.4% increase from 2023, which is the steepest rise of spending on security needs since the Cold War era. The Institute also went on to say that this spending is projected to reach 6.6 trillion by 2035 if the current trend of emphasizing defense needs continues. And this increase in the past few years was attributed by all corners of the world, as all regions of the world saw increases in spending. But especially there was rapid growth in Europe and in the Middle East. And just some other facts, more than 100 countries boosted their military spending in 2024. And the key spenders include US, China, Russia, Germany, and India, totaling 60% of the total military spending. But like I said, I think there's special emphasis on Europe and the Middle East, and it's due to some of these long-ranging conflicts that are happening in these regions. First up, Europe. All countries except Malta in Europe increased spending last year. And as we know, the war in Ukraine has entered its third year. So the European continent, the military spending on the continent, spending rose by 70%, higher actually than the level that was seen during the height of the Cold War. And Russia is obviously at the height of this spending. Russia spends about 20% of its government spending in military needs, defense spending. Ukraine spends about 34% of its GDP in military spending. And it's not just these two countries that are, directly involved in the conflict that spend a lot. Other countries like Germany, which is kind of with the UK, they're seen as the leader of NATO in many ways. Germany increased spending by 30%. Poland, which is a neighboring country, and has seen some interferences from the conflict, they also spent increased nearly 30% in spending, military spending, and NATO as a whole increased by 55%. Going to the Middle East, the region saw a 15% increase in spending, and this is obviously due to has a lot to do with the war in Gaza, which has entered its second year. Which has prolonged for over 2 years before the ceasefire happened last month. Israel, obviously, and Israel increased spending by 65%, while Lebanon and other countries that are also affected, they've tremendously increased spending as well. And also Asia, with the world's second largest spender in military spending, China, has really ramped up its defense spending due to the increased aggression by military juggernauts of China and Russia. Just looking at South Korea, Lee Jae Myung, he said that defense spending would rise by 8.2% next year, and that they also committed to align with U.S. standards, which was to raise defense spending to 3.5% of the country's GDP. And also includes a $25 billion investment in U.S. military equipment purchases by 2030. So all in all, I think with the Cold War ending more than 3 decades ago, and relative peace happening until the early 2000s, I think we've entered a new era of conflict that includes bipolar but also multipolar conflicts around the world. And I think that's why we're seeing tremendous increases in spending in military defense.
Right, and against this backdrop, Shreyas, quite a number of foreign media outlets have been covering South Korea's advancements as an arms exporter. What exactly, Shreyas, have they been saying?
Well, I think in many ways, a lot of the focus has been how South Korea has emerged as a powerful new player in global defense sales, particularly with its weapons export deals with Poland and UAE in recent years. It's already, I think, the second largest arms exporter to European NATO members, thanks to its vehicle and artillery supplies. And to some, this has been something of a surprise, positioning South Korea as an upstart entry into the global defense market, as one outlet put it. But others see it as part of a long-running push to become one of the world's biggest defense exporters. Lee Jae Myung has very much made it clear that he sees South Korea ascending to become the 4th biggest defense exporter in the coming years. And so the government is also seeking to increase its defense spending. And when analysts and media outlets around the world are looking at it, they say that a lot of this is down to South Korea essentially being well positioned to deliver modern systems quickly, cost-effectively, and more flexibly, thanks to its advanced industrial base as well as strong state support. And also, South Korea has essentially employed a smart diplomatic and industrial strategy, not just selling weapons, but also building long-term partnerships through technology transfer. For example, with K2 tanks that they sold to Poland. But a lot of this also at the same time, media and analysts are a little cautious. They say that South Korea has all what it takes to continue growing, but that success depends on maintaining its export momentum even after the Ukraine war ends, which has been a big driver of interest in defense imports for many of these countries, managing the risk of helping future competitors. For example, if Poland learns how to make those tanks, they can also continue selling them, and navigating shifting geopolitics. So as the Ukraine war ends, as other conflicts shift, and perhaps, as US interests in particular change, the defense market will keep shifting and its needs will keep shifting.
Shreyas, keeping in mind tensions here on the Korean Peninsula as we speak, what are your thoughts with regard to calls for a self-reliant defense posture for South Korea?
Right. Well, as mentioned, so Lee Jae Myung has very much prioritized strengthening South Korea's defense capabilities, not just the defense industry, but also the military over here. And a lot of this is framed as a matter of national pride, but at the same time, it's also a matter of prudence to avoid being entirely reliant on US forces. As Donald Trump has made it clear, the Korean Peninsula isn't necessarily his biggest priority in the region. When it comes to the US, they are keeping an eye on China. And so the role of the US forces, the role of US military deterrence in this region may eventually seek to prioritize China as a bigger issue. And so Lee Jae Myung is quite aware that you cannot always rely on US support here. And so between that and his own drive to strengthen South Korea's defense for national pride, he's been looking to introduce advanced weapon systems like AI combat robots, autonomous drones, precision-guided missiles, as part of a long-term strategy to strengthen capabilities. And of course, there are geopolitical concerns. For example, I mentioned what could happen with the US forces, which could be exacerbated even more in the case of a China-Taiwan conflict, which could require South Korea to handle its own defense if US forces get dragged into that conflict. But another factor, of course, is North Korea. While Lee Jae Myung has tried to minimize references to North Korea in his defense strengthening talk, it is the immediate threat right next to South Korea, and certainly keen to continue its own military and nuclear development no matter what happens on the southern side of the border. And Lee Jae Myung has said if peace falters on the Korean Peninsula, it doesn't just affect the people in this region, it could threaten global security. And of course, it essentially building South Korea's defense the way Lee Jae Myung sees it is also key to restoring trust and laying a foundation for future relations between the two Koreas, something North Korea, of course, would disagree with.
Right. Meanwhile, beyond national borders or the Korean Peninsula, that is, David, South Korea and the UAE, as you mentioned earlier, have a strategic partnership that covers collaboration in quite a number of fields. Keeping in mind the current climate of geopolitics, what do you suppose is the broader significance of this particular partnership?
Yeah, like I mentioned previously, the ties between the two countries go over 45 years. And this is a significant partnership in the Middle East, as Shreyas mentioned, which South Korea doesn't necessarily have close ties in that region compared to other regions in the world. So this is the President Lee's visit this week follows a state visit by former President Yoon Suk-yeol in 2023, which secured a $30 billion commitment from the UAE to South Korean energy and defense sectors. And President Lee even mentioned this during his interview with the local paper today. And I think it's just, this kind of sums up the relationship. South Korea is one of the world's largest energy importers, and the UAE is a key supplier of crude oil. So I think this relationship allows Seoul to diversify its energy routes and suppliers, while the UAE can benefit from the resources that South Korea has with its conglomerates, and the UAE also has been one of the key purchasers of South Korean defense equipment. And I think this relationship is really a model middle power dynamic or partnership, I guess. And I'm saying middle power in the sense that the two countries are not necessarily the preeminent powers in their respective regions or play of power, but with this dynamic kind of relationship, they're able to diversify away from being too dependent on the, I guess, prevalent powers or traditional Western powers like the US. So it diversifies diplomatic partnerships beyond the US-China rivalry, especially in today's context. And I think this is important because, as we just talked about, with the increase of defense spending across the world, these geopolitical uncertainties call for these types of relationships that are not just limited to the region, but rather they're functional partnerships that reduce vulnerabilities for both parties. And just one kind of example is, one thing I wanted to point out is that President Lee, tomorrow he's poised to visit the AK unit in the UAE. And this is a military unit made up of South Korean troops in the Korea Special Warfare Unit in the country. And they train military forces in special warfare and counterterrorism operations. And the point of this military unit is to strengthen military cooperation with the UAE and also tasked with protecting Korean nationals in the region. And I think this is kind of one of the many possibilities that can arise with such partnerships. So yeah, I think it's a very important diplomatic partnership that will increase in importance in the future.
Right, for sure. And after the president's visit to that unit to boost morale, Shreyas, President Lee Jae Myung is poised to address students at Cairo University in Egypt on Thursday local time to share South Korea's initiatives in the region. Now, with regard to that particular address, Shreyas, what will you be keeping your eyes and ears on?
Well, it is, of course, primarily a university address. But I think such speeches can always offer hints as to the president's priorities and policies during such visits and for the future of relations with the region. So perhaps one thing to keep an eye out will there be any hints of specific initiatives launched to promote cooperation, particularly on key areas? And so it'll be interesting to hear how President Lee promotes Korea's main areas of focus in the region as he presents his vision for engagement. And a lot of it is likely to come along expected lines. Defense cooperation, particularly defense industry deals, that's something that the presidential office has been very keen to emphasize as a focus for relations with the Middle East. But also, of course, AI, which is a central part of the current government's policies and its investment in South Korea, but also elsewhere, very much focused on that cooperation. But there'll be other areas, of course. Across the Middle East, energy security is a big priority when it comes to President Lee's agenda. And so that will also certainly be there on the trip. There will be focus on green energy as well, not just traditional energy. And in general, promoting more cultural exchanges, more people-to-people exchanges, and education. I think these are perhaps the main threads of conversation we are likely to see. And obviously, at a university, that education factor and trying to keep an eye on on shaping the image of South Korea in their minds, that is something that will be a big priority for President Lee.
Right, indeed. And we'll have details with regard to that particular speech at the University of Cairo in Egypt on Thursday local time, that would be. All right, Shreyas, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And David here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Sunny.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching and do join us again same time tomorrow for more panel discussion on diplomacy.